Black nurse treats homeless man with kindness, not realizing he was a retired judge. The words danced across Maya Johnson's mind as she watched the disheveled man shuffle into the ER waiting room, his weathered face a roadmap of hardship. This was the moment that would change everything, though she couldn't possibly know it yet. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows beneath Maya's eyes, accentuating the exhaustion of her third consecutive 12-hour shift. At 32, her compassion remained undiminished, despite the grinding pressure of understaffing and the emotional toll of the pandemic's aftermath. The stethoscope around her neck felt heavier tonight, like a yoke rather than a tool of healing. "Room 3 needs vitals," barked Dr. Whitman without looking up from his tablet. "The homeless guy. Probably just looking for a warm bed." Maya nodded silently, biting back the retort that formed instinctively on her tongue. After 7 years as an ER nurse, she had developed a protective shell against the casual callousness that permeated medical culture. But she never allowed that shell to harden completely. That would mean becoming everything she had promised herself she would never be. The man in room 3 sat perched on the edge of the examination table, his body curled slightly inward as if protecting something precious. His clothes, layers of mismatched garments, hung from his frame, telling the story of significant weight loss. Despite the grime and the unkempt gray beard, there was something dignified in the way he held his shoulders, something almost regal in his profile. "Good evening, sir," Maya said, her voice deliberately gentle. "I'm Nurse Johnson. I'll be taking your vitals." The man looked up, and Maya felt something twist in her chest. His eyes, a clear, penetrating hazel, seemed to belong to a different face altogether. They were lucid, intelligent, and carried a depth of sorrow that made her own troubles suddenly seem insignificant. "Thank you," he replied, his voice a low rumble, cultured despite its hoarseness. "I appreciate your time." Maya smiled, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his thin arm. His skin was cold to the touch, scattered with small cuts and bruises that spoke of life on the streets. As the machine hummed, she noticed his fingernails, though dirty, were neatly trimmed, a small act of self-preservation amid chaos. "What brings you in today, Mr.?" She glanced at the chart. "Mr. Thompson?" "Robert?" he corrected softly. "I've been having chest pains." "Probably nothing." He attempted a dismissive wave but winced as pain flashed across his features. Maya frowned, noting his elevated blood pressure and the slight irregularity in his pulse. "How long have you been experiencing these pains, Robert?" 3 days, perhaps 4. The days. He paused. They blend together sometimes. As Maya continued her assessment, she noticed a small book peeking from his tattered coat pocket. Tennyson's poetry, its spine cracked and pages dog-eared. Not the typical possession of someone living on the streets. Her curiosity deepened. "You like poetry?" she asked, pressing the stethoscope to his chest, listening to the labored rhythm of his heart. Something in Robert's expression shifted, a momentary lifting of the clouds. "The words remain when all else is gone," he said simply. Maya finished her assessment, documenting his symptoms with careful precision. "The doctor will be in shortly," she assured him, but hesitated at the door. Against protocol, against the warning bells of professional boundaries, she added, "Would you like some tea while you wait? It's freezing out there tonight." Robert's eyes widened slightly, as if her small kindness was more surprising than any diagnosis. "That would be most welcome." Maya returned with a steaming cup and a packaged sandwich she'd purchased from the cafeteria. "Hospital tea is terrible," she admitted with a conspiratorial smile, "but it's hot." "Why?" Robert asked, accepting the offerings with trembling hands. "Why what? Why show kindness to someone like me? Most people see the dirt, not the person." The question pierced Maya more deeply than she expected. She thought of her grandmother, who had raised her in a small apartment in Baltimore after her mother's death. "My grandma always said that everyone deserves dignity, especially when they're at their lowest. That's when it matters most." Robert's eyes glistened. He sipped the tea carefully, his gaze never leaving her face. "Your grandmother was a wise woman." "The wisest," Maya agreed, the familiar ache of loss softened by the warmth of memory. "She raised me after my mom died. Worked as a housekeeper at a downtown hotel for 30 years. Never finished high school, but she could quote Shakespeare and solve crossword puzzles faster than anyone I knew." Dr. Whitman's entrance interrupted their conversation. He delivered his assessment with clinical efficiency: mild angina, likely exacerbated by exposure and malnutrition. Standard medication was prescribed, with the typical indifferent reminder that follow-up with a primary care physician was strongly recommended. A cruel joke for someone without health insurance or a permanent address. "We'll keep you overnight for observation," the doctor concluded, already turning toward the door. "Nurse Johnson will get you settled." When they were alone again, Maya saw the resignation in Robert's eyes. "It's just for tonight," he said softly. Then back to... He trailed off. "Where do you stay, Robert?" Maya asked, helping him onto the gurney that would transport him to the observation ward. "There's an underpass near Westlake Park. Some of us have formed a community of sorts." His attempt at a smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not the chambers I once occupied, but it serves its purpose." The word chambers caught Maya's attention, an unusual choice that tugged at her professional instincts. As a nurse, she had learned to listen not just to what patients said, but how they said it. Over the next 8 hours, Maya found herself drawn repeatedly to Robert's room. Between caring for other patients, she checked his vitals, adjusted his blankets, and most importantly, listened. In fragments and whispers, his story emerged. Not all of it, but enough to sense the outline of a life derailed. He spoke of a daughter in Seattle who believed him dead, his choice, not hers. He referenced a career ended by one fatal error of judgment. And once, when pain medication loosened his carefully constructed barriers, he mentioned a courtroom where justice and mercy were meant to balance, like scales in the hands of a blindfolded goddess. As her shift neared its end, Maya made a decision that defied both hospital policy and common sense. She wrote her phone number on the back of a patient education brochure. "When they discharge you tomorrow," she said, placing it in his hand, "call me. I volunteer at a shelter on Thursdays. They have resources, medical care, job placement, housing assistance." Robert's fingers closed around the paper. "Why would you trouble yourself?" Maya thought of all the reasons she shouldn't: her exhaustion, her own financial struggles, the professional boundaries she was obliterating. But what emerged was a simple truth: "Because I see you, Robert, not just your circumstances." The next morning, Maya returned to find Robert's bed empty, the sheets neatly folded, her brochure gone. She told herself it was for the best, that she had done what she could. But the hollow feeling in her chest persisted throughout the day and followed her home to her small apartment, where the silence seemed to mock her solitary existence. 2 days later, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Nurse Johnson?" Robert's voice was stronger than she remembered. I wondered if that offer of assistance was still available. The shelter was crowded but organized, a converted warehouse where Maya had volunteered for the past 3 years. Robert sat across from her at a folding table, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee, looking somehow both more vulnerable and more dignified in the harsh overhead lighting. "First things first," Maya said, professional mode engaged despite the unorthodox setting. "We need to address your medical needs. The hospital prescribed medication, but you'll need ongoing care." Robert nodded, a flash of something, shame perhaps, crossing his features. "My circumstances make traditional healthcare challenging. That's why we have the clinic here," Maya explained, gesturing toward the partitioned area where volunteer doctors provided basic care. "And I can help navigate the system for the more complex issues." Their conversation shifted to practical matters: the shelter's rules, available beds, meal schedules. But beneath the logistics lay a current of connection neither acknowledged directly. For Maya, Robert had become more than a patient, more than even a person in need. He had become a mirror reflecting her own loneliness, her own questions about the purpose of her life's work. As winter deepened into the coldest February on record, Maya's Thursday visits to the shelter became anchored around Robert's progress. He had secured a regular bed, begun attending the shelter's computer literacy classes, and even started helping in the makeshift library, organizing donated books with the precision of someone intimately familiar with cataloging systems. One evening, after helping serve meals, Maya found Robert tutoring a young man, patiently explaining the format for a job application letter. His voice carried the measured cadence of a lecturer, his instructions clear and thoughtful. "You have a gift for teaching," Maya observed after the young man left, visibly buoyed by Robert's guidance. Robert's smile was tinged with melancholy. "In another life, I taught constitutional law at the state university, before the bench claimed me." The casual reference hung between them, the first direct acknowledgement of his former profession. Maya waited, giving him space to continue or retreat. 27 years? he said finally, eyes focused on something beyond the shelter walls. 27 years I wore the robe. Superior Court Judge Robert Thompson. He laughed softly, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Now that's a name I haven't used in its entirety for some time. Maya absorbed this confirmation of what she had begun to suspect. What happened? She asked simply. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. A case. The kind that follows you home, that sits on your chest in the dark hours. A young man, 19, charged with drug possession. A third strike under the mandatory sentencing laws. He paused, swallowing hard. The evidence was clear. The law was clear. But the boy, he reminded me of my own son at that age, before the car accident took him. Maya reached across the table instinctively, her fingers brushing his weathered knuckles. I sentenced him to 20 years, Robert continued, his voice barely audible. As the law demanded, as my oath required. 2 weeks later, he hanged himself in his cell. The silence that followed seemed to expand, filling the space between them with an almost physical presence. I began to question everything. The law, justice, my role in a system that could destroy lives with such cold efficiency. My marriage was already strained after my son's death. My drinking, which had been a private comfort, became public embarrassment. Robert looked up, meeting Maya's eyes directly. I resigned from the bench. My wife divorced me. I sought oblivion in a bottle until I lost my home, my savings, my identity. By the time I emerged from that darkness, years had passed. My daughter had declared me legally dead, and perhaps she was right. The man I had been did die. Maya felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't about her emotions. This was Robert's story to tell, his burden to share. Why not reach out to your daughter? Let her know you're alive? Robert's smile was a grimace of pain. And tell her what? That her once respected father is now a homeless alcoholic? Better she remember the man I was, not the shell I've become. But you're not just a shell, Maya protested, the words bursting forth before she could consider them. The man who quotes Tennyson, who helps others with job applications, who folds hospital sheets before leaving, that man is still very much alive. Their eyes met across the table, hers fierce with conviction, his clouded with doubt, and something shifted in the air between them. Not romance, not even friendship exactly, but recognition. Two souls acknowledging each other's complete humanity. Spring arrived with unexpected gentleness, coaxing cherry blossoms from dormant branches and drawing longer shadows across the shelter's courtyard. Robert's transformation mirrored the season's renewal. With Maya's persistent advocacy, he had secured regular medical care, transitional housing in a single-room occupancy hotel, and a part-time position helping the shelter's literacy program. On a particularly golden afternoon, they sat on a park bench, watching children chase bubbles across the grass. Robert had trimmed his beard, and his second-hand clothes, while still modest, were clean and properly fitted. The haunted look had receded from his eyes, replaced by something Maya might dare to call contentment. "I've been thinking about what you said," Robert began, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "About still being alive?" Maya waited, having learned that Robert's most important statements often required patience. "I wrote to my daughter last week." His voice caught slightly. "Just a simple note telling her I'm alive, that I'm getting help. I gave her the shelter's address for reply." "That took courage," Maya said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Robert turned to face her fully. "You saw possibility where others saw only ruin. You extended dignity when I had forgotten my own worth." Maya felt her cheeks warm. "I just did my job." "No," Robert shook his head firmly. "Your job was to take my vitals and move to the next patient. Everything after that was choice. Your choice to see the person behind the circumstances." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when Robert reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch, the kind that might once have held jewelry. "I wanted you to have this," he said, placing it in her palm. "It's the only thing of value I kept through all these years." Maya opened the pouch to find a small gold pin, the scales of justice, delicately rendered. "Robert, I can't accept this, please," he interrupted gently. "It was given to me when I took the bench. For years, I couldn't look at it without shame. Now, when I see it, I'll think of how you balanced kindness with professionalism, compassion with boundaries. A better kind of justice than I ever administered from the bench." Before Maya could respond, a shelter volunteer approached, slightly breathless. "Mr. Thompson, there's someone asking for you at reception. Says she's your daughter." The color drained from Robert's face. "Catherine? Here?" The woman who waited in the shelter's modest lobby was unmistakably Robert's daughter, the same penetrating hazel eyes, the same proud set of the shoulders. She stood rigid, her expression a complex mixture of disbelief, anger, and desperate hope. "Dad?" The word emerged as both question and accusation. Robert stopped several feet away, suddenly looking frail again. "Catherine, you came." 7 years, she said, her voice trembling. 7 years I thought you were dead. We had a funeral. I scattered what I thought were your ashes in Mom's garden." "I'm sorry," Robert whispered, the inadequacy of the words hanging in the air between them. Maya began to retreat, feeling like an intruder in this intensely private moment, but Catherine's gaze shifted to her. "Are you the nurse? The one who helped him?" "Maya Johnson," she confirmed with a nod. "Your father was my patient." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for seeing him when the rest of the world didn't. Even when he didn't want to be seen." The three of them moved to the shelter's small conference room, where the conversation unfolded in painful fits and starts. Catherine, now a corporate attorney with 2 children of her own, had never fully believed the story of her father's death. Something in her had always suspected he might still be alive, lost in his guilt and grief. "I was angry for so long," she admitted. "At the system that broke you, at Mom for giving up on you, at you for disappearing. But mostly at myself for not finding a way to reach you before you vanished." Robert reached across the table, his hand hovering uncertainly before Catherine clasped it firmly in her own. "The fault was never yours," he said, his voice breaking. "I convinced myself you were better off without me. We're never better off without the people we love," Catherine replied, the simple truth of it filling the room. Maya excused herself, giving them privacy for their reunion, but not before Catherine pressed her business card into her hand. "Please stay in touch. What you did for my father, there aren't words." Later that evening, after her shift at the hospital, Maya sat alone in her apartment, Robert's judicial pin catching the lamplight on her coffee table. The day's events replayed in her mind, bringing with them a profound sense of both satisfaction and emptiness. She had helped facilitate a miracle of reconnection, yet her own life remained fundamentally unchanged. The same lonely apartment, the same exhausting job, the same questions about purpose and meaning. Her phone chimed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Catherine Thompson. Having dinner with Dad tomorrow night at my home. He insists you join us. Please say yes." Maya stared at the message, conflicting emotions washing through her. Professional boundaries dictated distance. Hospital policies discouraged personal involvement with patients. But the woman who had seen Robert Thompson as a person first and a patient second, that woman had already crossed those lines with deliberate intent. "I'd be honored," she typed back. The months that followed transformed all their lives in ways none could have predicted. Catherine helped her father navigate the complex process of legally returning from the dead, reinstating his identity, accessing his pension, addressing the medical and psychological issues stemming from his years of homelessness. Robert, with the cautious blessing of old colleagues, began speaking to law students about justice reform, his personal story lending powerful weight to theoretical discussions of mandatory sentencing and rehabilitation. The speaking fees, modest as they were, allowed him to rent a small apartment near Catherine's family, and Maya, inspired by Robert's journey, returned to school part-time to pursue a master's degree in public health policy, focusing on healthcare access for homeless populations. The hospital, recognizing the value of her experience, created a new position for her coordinating care between the ER and community resources. 1 year to the day after Robert first walked into St. Mary's Hospital, they gathered in Catherine's backyard for a celebration, not just of survival, but of renewal. Robert, now almost unrecognizable from the disheveled man in the ER, stood tall in a crisp button-down shirt, playing catch with his grandson while Catherine grilled burgers. Maya watched from the patio, a contentment she had never expected warming her from within. She had been invited not as a nurse, not as a savior, but as family. The kind that forms not from blood, but from choice, from recognition, from the simple act of seeing another human being in their fullness. Robert caught her eye across the yard and smiled, a smile untainted by shame or regret. He excused himself from the game and joined her on the patio, easing into the chair beside her with the deliberate movements of a man still reconciling with the limitations of age and past hardship. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, voice steady and clear. "When you brought me tea and a sandwich. Maya nodded, remembering the tremble in his hands, the surprise in his eyes at such a simple kindness. "I've had a year to analyze what happened," Robert continued, the judge's analytical mind evident in his measured words. "And I've concluded that what you offered wasn't just kindness, it was recognition. You looked at a homeless man and saw a human being worthy of dignity." "Anyone would have done the same," Maya demurred. Robert laughed softly. "We both know that's not true. Most people look away. Most systems process rather than connect. You chose differently." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gift box. "Catherine helped me with this. I hope you'll accept it." Inside lay a silver pendant, a delicate rendering of a hand extended in offering. On the back, an inscription, "In recognition of the light you bring. With eternal gratitude, RT." "Robert," Maya breathed. "It's beautiful, but—" "No protests," he interrupted gently. "My judicial career taught me to recognize the extraordinary when I see it. What you did, seeing me when I was invisible, believing in possibility when I had surrendered to despair, that was extraordinary." Catherine called them to dinner then, the moment suspended as they joined the family at the table. But later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, Maya found herself standing beside Robert at the garden fence, looking out at the neighborhood beyond. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question that had lingered unspoken between them. Robert considered this, his profile etched against the deepening blue of evening. "Now we continue. I mentor law students. You pursue your degree. We both try to change the systems that failed so many like me." He turned to face her, his expression solemn. "But more importantly, we remember. We remember that titles, judge or nurse, homeless or executive, these are just temporary conditions. What endures is our humanity, our capacity to see each other truly." Maya nodded, the pendant warm against her skin beneath her blouse. In a world of hasty judgments and casual dismissals, the radical act of truly seeing another person remained rare and precious, a kind of justice more profound than any court could dispense. As night fell completely, stars appearing one by one above them, Maya understood that the greatest transformation wasn't Robert's journey from homeless man to restored father and advocate, nor was it her own evolution from burned-out nurse to purposeful student and coordinator. The true transformation was in their perception, in learning to look beyond circumstances to the essential humanity that no hardship could erase, no title could enhance. It was a lesson etched now in both their hearts, a reminder that in a world of quick assessments and hasty categorizations, the most powerful act remains the simplest, to see the person, not the circumstance. And sometimes, that act of seeing is enough to change everything.